Today I have something a bit out of the ordinary for you. Religion is something I don't normally talk about, mainly because of how controversial it is and how unlikely you are to change anyone's mind. Whether atheist or theist, the vast majority of people already believe what they believe about God, and you're not going to move them off their square. However, religion was a huge part of my early life and adolescence, and I had an unusual journey with it. And as a result, I have a perspective on religion that I don't think most people have. Now, before I get into the meat of this episode, you're probably going to want to hear a little background as to where all my ideas came from and why I believe what I believe in the first place. For my entire life up until college, I went to a religious school. That's not the unusual part, but it was where I formed my first ideas about religion. I don't know how bad or good my school really was because I don't have another religious school to compare it to, but I know that the school I went to was pretty dogmatic in the way they approached Christianity. For example, when I was in grade school, they banned students from reading Harry Potter books and watching the Harry Potter movies because they said it taught witchcraft. They also taught us that evolution wasn't real and that the Earth was 4,000 years old. So, pretty religious. They even had an apologetics class in high school where they taught us how to logically argue for Christianity. The funny part was, most of my doubts regarding the logic of Christianity started in that apologetics class. And I think the same was true for other students as well. But that's beside the point. The point is, I was born into a highly religious environment, and as a result, I believed in Christianity when I was young. But there was another problem, one that had nothing to do with school, which is that I had abusive parents. And they weren't always abusive in the way you think. For my parents, it wasn't just about violence. A lot of the abuse was actually psychological. My parents were very proficient liars and gaslighters, especially my mom. I know gaslighting has become a notorious term in recent years. People talk about how the media and influencers will sometimes gaslight their audience, but I got to experience the real thing in person. I'm not going to delve into every detail of what happened, but suffice to say, my parents were not honest people. For example, my mom would sometimes do things like fly into a fit of rage and then immediately afterward deny that anything happened. My dad was no better. My dad usually wasn't present, but when he was there, he would just go along with whatever my mom said. If I questioned it, they would snap back and get angry at me for even questioning them. Another thing they would do is be complete chameleons. When other people were around, they would be these sweet and innocent people, and as soon as no one was watching, they would immediately turn dark and nasty. It was like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, just totally different people behind closed doors. They could say whatever they wanted, but I could see with my own eyes that they were lying, not just in terms of what they said, but in terms of who they were as people. When I realized that the people who were closest to me could lie so blatantly and so easily, it caused me to distrust everything I was told by all authority figures, including everything my religious school was teaching. Now, I don't remember exactly what age I was when I developed that level of distrust, but I think at some point in my early teens, I just started to assume everything I'd been told about religion was either wrong or misguided, even if I didn't have the words to explain why I thought it was wrong. In many ways, that distrust ended up being a good thing because it forced me to take my own independent path towards knowledge throughout my life, and forced me to develop my own understandings of reality and truth from the ground up, which is ultimately what led to my book and to this podcast. Anyway, in summary, when I was small, I believed in Christianity because that's what I was told. Then I got into my teens and became an atheist. But now I've had a long time to sit and craft my own thoughts, and I've come back around to believing in God. However, my opinions about God are probably not what you expect. From the very moment I rejected religion, my goal was to build the most logical ideas about reality that I could, based purely on rationality and what I could observe. If someone said something that sounded like it could be true, I explored that idea, but I never attached myself to any particular philosophy, at least early on. Well, now my thoughts on religion are fully formed, and in this episode, I'm going to explain all of it. So, why are people religious in the first place? Before explaining what I think is wrong with religion, I want to try to give an honest account of what religion does right, and I think there are a lot of things religion has going for it. Ever since humans developed a prefrontal cortex and language, we've asked why we're here, what our purpose is, and what created life and the universe. And thus far, all of these questions have remained unanswered. Now, if we had the ability to simply leave these questions unanswered and be okay with not knowing, maybe religion would have never existed. But it seems that there is some deep-rooted part of human psychology that longs for answers and a sense of purpose. Religion seems to be the only thing that has consistently provided that throughout all of history. But that isn't the only thing religion provides. See, I think answers and a sense of purpose is really just the top of the pyramid. Along with that comes many other things that we often take for granted. Humans are capable of accomplishing many great things when we come together for a common function, with a common philosophy driving our actions. Religion is the glue that has held together many a story of triumph and achievement. When things are really truly difficult, when achieving something requires real risk or loss, one of the main reasons why humans have kept pushing through the pain is because they believe in something greater than themselves, because they believe there is a higher purpose to it. Without the belief in a higher power, it's harder to justify risking your life for a pursuit that could very easily kill you or maim you, like getting on a rocket to the moon, or boarding a ship to find a new land, or experimenting with deadly substances and machines, or pursuing ideas which can leave one ostracized by society. I'm not saying an atheist can't do these things, but religion seems to have provided many people with the psychological fortitude to follow through with many great ventures. Religion also helps many people through general life difficulty. If you actually listen to regular people talk about their belief in God, they will often talk about God in the context of God helping them through something, giving them some sense that everything will be okay, which a lot of people need in order to endure difficult situations and monotonous lives. Religion also plays a role in love and community. There's a reason why religious people throughout the world are more likely to stay married for longer periods of time, because as the initial euphoria of a relationship fades and the day-to-day grind sets in, belief in a higher power is often what gives people a reason to stick around, aside from the temporary euphoria. There's a caveat to this, of course, which is that it depends on the culture. We won't name names, but certain cultures have much higher divorce rates and lower marriage rates, and it may have to do with some key cultural factors. If you're interested, I discuss this at length in episode 5 of this podcast titled The Marriage Question. A sense of community is also generally easier to achieve with religion. Belief in God is the thread that ties many people together and gives them something clear and definite with which they can relate to each other, a distinct connection which binds their hearts and their minds. That sense of community is hard to beat, at least when it's done right. Non-religious people have tried to beat it, and in my opinion they often fail, because the philosophies of non-religious people tend to be less consistent. And because their philosophies are less consistent with each other, it becomes harder to develop a common ethos or a common purpose. Again, I'm not saying non-religious people can't have strong communities, but everywhere I look, I continue to see religious communities being stronger and more prevalent than non-religious communities. So what about the logical element? Are there any good arguments for religion or for the existence of God? Well, in my view, many arguments for mainstream religions contain logical contradictions and holes that often get ignored by religious people, and that makes it hard for a smart, objective person to justify being religious. But, believe it or not, I do think there are a few logical pro-God positions. The first, and best one, in my opinion, is actually from a joke. Instead of telling the joke myself, I'll just let Pete Holmes tell it.
Some people think God created the universe. Some people think nothing created the universe, which is the funniest guess. And the nothing people make fun of the God people. They say God doesn't exist. I'm like, okay, maybe. But you know what definitely doesn't exist? Nothing. That's the defining characteristic of nothing, is that it doesn't exist. So what are we talking about? Either you think it's God, something you can't see, touch, taste, photograph, and science can't prove, or you think it's nothing, something you can't see, touch, taste, photograph, and science can't prove. But I think we can all agree, if your nothing sometimes spontaneously erupts into everything, that's a pretty goddamn magical fucking nothing, you guys.
It's such a simple idea, but the logic is there. Nothing is, by definition, non-existent. It is the perfect opposite of existence. Just like a square can't be a circle, and a 0 can't be a 1, something and nothing can't both be at the same time in the same place. They are mutually exclusive concepts. And from what we've observed, things which exist always come from other things which exist. So if you said that existence came from non-existence, that would be an inherently illogical statement. It goes against everything we can observe. Therefore, if the universe exists, it would make sense to believe that the universe and everything in it came from something prior, and that prior thing must have come from something prior, which came from something prior, and forever on it goes. If you wanted to, you could describe that whole schema, that forever existent reality, as God, or as something God created. Now, some people will still try to argue that everything could have come from nothing, and maybe that's true, but we've literally never observed that happening, which means if you believe that all of existence spontaneously erupted from nothing, that requires the exact same level of faith as belief in a religion. In both cases, you must accept something that's never been scientifically demonstrated. The difference is, it's actually logical to believe that reality has always existed, because reality exists now, whereas the idea that everything came from nothing carries no logic. Even if our universe was a digital simulation, there must be some real existent thing doing the simulating, like a high-powered computer. The very fact that we have an experience of the universe means something real must be creating that experience, and that something must have come from something else, and so on. Here's another argument that I don't hear many people talk about, but I think it's relevant. Some people believe that life in the universe came about randomly, and some people believe God created life. But even if living creatures in the universe did appear randomly through complete chance, that's actually not good enough for life to exist now. Think about this. Your immune system has to function in a very specific way for you to survive. When a T cell in your body moves to get rid of an infection, does that T cell know what it's doing? Probably not. And yet, it's still performing a goal which benefits your body, even if the T cell itself is not consciously aware of its behavior. Well, the thing about a goal is that it's an explicitly non-random orientation. For a creature to have a goal, it must go out of its way, spending precious limited energy to accomplish a specific objective. Instead of being random, goals are an example of motivated organization, purposeful action toward a particular endpoint. Just like existence is the fundamental opposite of non-existence, purposeful action is the fundamental opposite of randomness. That which is random can never contain purposeful action, and purposeful action can never be random because it has a purpose, regardless of what that purpose is or whether it's conscious. Now, Christians will tell you that the reason T cells work the way they do is because God designed your body like that, but I think that's an overly simplistic way of looking at things. That's the easy answer to something that's probably more complicated. Not everyone's body works exactly the same, but one thing that's always true is that motivated organization and purposeful action are intrinsic components of all life. Sure, it's possible that a random universe could eventually spit out an organism by randomly arranging atoms and electrons and ions, but generating an organism is not really the challenge. Just because a life form arises from the extraordinary circumstances of matter collecting properly does not mean that that life form would in any way be fit to continue living. There's no fundamental law of the universe that makes it so a living thing must keep itself alive. Therefore, there's no reason why a creature born from randomness wouldn't just allow itself to die. In order to keep itself and its species alive for long periods of time, an organism must somehow be motivated to do that. And it must retain that motivation in perpetuity. And again, that motivation, the goal of keeping yourself alive, is an intrinsically non-random thing. So basically, for life as we know it to come from randomness, something which is the perfect opposite of randomness must come about randomly. If this sounds like the something coming from nothing argument, you'd be correct. We've never observed something random result in motivated organization and purposeful action. Every single living being that you know of, every bacteria, every virus, every animal, every person, was spawned by another living thing which existed beforehand. Now you might say,
billions of years ago, the universe couldn't support life, so life couldn't have existed back then.
But that's an assumption. Life as we know it couldn't have existed back then. But billions of years ago, life may not have looked the way it does now. It's possible life could have existed back then, just in a different form. You could say,
well, there's no evidence for that.
But that's not a good argument. The vast majority of the universe is unexplored. We don't know what evidence is or isn't out there. Plus, bodies decompose and materials change with time. There really isn't much from billions of years ago that's still around today that we can study. Typically, we can only study the past by making inferences about things in the present based on current conditions. We can't actually visit the past to see if those inferences are 100% correct, which means evidence for life in the distant past is going to be hard to come by, regardless of whether that life existed. What we do know is that motivated organization and purposeful action are inherently non-random things. And just like we've never observed matter coming from nothing, we've also never observed randomness create something non-random. Ever. So yes, it is possible that life appeared spontaneously, but believing that something non-random came from randomness requires just as much faith as any religion. But in my opinion, the real reason why people are religious has nothing to do with any of this. The main reason people are religious is because of the way it makes them feel. People mostly believe in God because of the sense of comfort or confidence or relief or safety or certainty that belief brings them. You can come up with all the logical reasons you want, but for the most part, people don't believe in God because of the logic. It's because they have experienced a psychological or emotional benefit from believing in God. The problem many atheists have is they underestimate and minimize the power of those emotional experiences. Someone like Sam Harris thinks we can and should get rid of religion, but he doesn't seem to recognize that the emotional element of religion guarantees that religion will always be part of human society. These experiences are so powerful that many people have devoted their entire lives to religion because of them. Just because Sam Harris may not have had one of these experiences, he somehow seems to think that these experiences are tiny insignificant things that people will just give up on if they hear the right dissertation. People are emotional creatures. Until you get rid of the emotional component of religion, religion will continue to persist. So if religion is not something you can get rid of, then we must learn to integrate religion into society. The real question is how to do that in a way that doesn't put your society at risk of collapse in the long term. We'll get to that subject in a minute. On top of the psychological benefits, you can just see that many people without religion aren't doing so great. It is increasingly common in Western society for people to be depressed and suicidal and nihilistic and egocentric and generally miserable. There is an existential apathy and self-aggrandizement that many people have turned to in place of religion, and it shows up in many areas of culture. You could say,
That's not because of lack of religion.
yeah, are you sure? Because it seems to me that these problems are not nearly as prevalent in highly religious communities as they are in non-religious communities. There are, of course, religious people who still deal with these kinds of issues. I've known some of them. But if we're looking at the bigger picture, it seems very obvious to me that the less religious the population is, the more likely people are to deal with these kinds of existential problems. The argument for religion in this case is a practical one. The truth is, many people are psychologically better off, and many societies more functional with religion as a compass, even if the religion itself is not always logical. This isn't true in every case, but it is true all too often. So what exactly is my problem with religion? I've spent all this time talking about religion like it's a good thing, and while I recognize that religion does have value for many people, I myself am not religious. So why? Well, there are many different criticisms one can have about religion. If you take any major religion that exists in the world, there will likely be plenty of contradictions in their teachings. Back when I was an atheist, I practically had a whole Rolodex of problems with Christianity that I'd memorized. But today, I'm going to skip all that and get to what I think is the biggest issue. There is one ultimate flaw that not just Christianity, but all religions share. It's what I call the final problem of religion. It is a problem no religion can solve, at least at the moment. See, even if we accept that God exists, even if we accept that God created the universe and created all of life, there's still a big question we're left with. Which God was it? Throughout human history, many religions and denominations have existed. Throughout the years, people have generated thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of religious theories about God, and how God works, and what God wants, and what God is. And many of these religious theories directly oppose each other. Hinduism, for instance, claims that humans are constantly being reincarnated into the universe, living life again and again, until we live the perfect life and transcend the human world. Muslims, however, believe that you only get one chance at human life, and if you live it the wrong way, you are permanently deprived of God's rewards in the afterlife. If you think about it, both of these theories cannot be true at the same time. It is not possible for reincarnation theory to be true and the one-life theory to be true. One of these theories has to be mistaken. There's no way around it. The various religions of the world teach different things, and in fact, some religious teachings go directly against other religions. When that happens, it creates a logical rift. Two opposing teachings can't both be correct. Someone has to be wrong. The question is, who? If it's not possible for all religions to be correct, then how do you determine which one is right? Well, that's the problem. There is no way to determine. Because every religion is based on yet unverified claims, the only thing we can use to determine which religion is correct is your own beliefs and feelings. And unfortunately, beliefs and feelings can be mistaken. Now, it's possible that future events will play out in such a way that one religion ends up being supported over all others. It's also possible that we could develop some way of scientifically determining what happens after death. But until that happens, it is completely up in the air which religion is the right religion, if any. Therefore, the final problem of religion is the fact that other religions exist and could negate yours. If Christians are correct, it means paganism is wrong. If Judaism is correct, it means Muslims are wrong. Until we die and meet our Maker, no one can actually know who's right. And even after we die, the whole truth still might not be revealed. Now, I'm sure there are some idiots who think it's possible for everyone to be right. Some people might think,
Christianity and paganism could both be right if there are different gods that do different things and rule in different ways. Like there might totally be a Christian god that punishes you for not believing in Jesus, but there might also be other gods that operate by pagan rules.
But first off, this idea goes directly against Christian teachings. Christianity explicitly teaches that there is only one God, the God of the Bible. For that reason alone, Christianity is incompatible with paganism, which means both of them cannot possibly be true. When two religions disagree with each other strongly enough, the only way to merge them together is to change one or both of the underlying religions, and when you do that, you are destroying the essence of that religion. In other words, it is not logically possible for all religions to be correct, because too many of them teach things which directly contradict each other. Aside from that, there's also the issue of moral divergence. Different religions often have entirely different moral systems, and people with highly conflicting moral systems cannot coexist in the same society for long periods of time. If one religion believes it's morally right to imprison or kill homosexuals, and another religion believes homosexuality should be protected, and if people from these two religions are around each other on a regular basis, you're eventually going to see hostility. When groups with competing moral systems live in the same society, conflict will always arise, because morals are a huge part of what makes society function in the first place. And this isn't just true for religious societies either, it's true for all societies. As a side note, many people want to think that morality is this simple and easy to understand thing. They assume that right and wrong is something that's obvious and that everybody knows. But if that were true, then why have so many different moral systems existed throughout the world and throughout history? If right and wrong were so black and white, then why are there so many different variations of right and wrong that people believe in? Is it because you're the only one in the world who knows what's moral? Or could it be that morality is not so clear and simple, especially when you include the complexities of human relationships and emerging technologies? If you're a thinking person, it's very easy to recognize that morality is not just a simple and obvious thing. Religion provides a basic framework for morality, which is great when everyone in your community or society believes the same as you. The problem arises when not everyone in your society agrees on what's right and wrong. In my opinion, morality itself evolved as a way of maintaining stability in human societies. You can pick out any society that exists today or in the past, and at the center of all these societies is some moral system, whether spoken or unspoken, which holds the thing together. And if you look at the cases where powerful societies were destroyed, in the vast majority of those cases, people started having major disagreements about what was right and wrong, and that conflict ended up being a large component of their downfall. Furthermore, if you look at nearly every mainstream controversy in the news today, especially political controversies, at the heart of it, almost all of these controversies are occurring because large amounts of people disagree on what's right and wrong, as well as how to enforce those morals. The more extreme these disagreements become, the more extreme the nature of the fighting becomes, and as that happens, the more it threatens the society itself. If it's true that morality was invented as a social stabilizer, then morality cannot do its job when there are too many people living under the same roof who disagree on what's moral. You need common morality for society to function. Now, technically, you don't need religion to have common morality, but from what it seems, common morality is generally easier to achieve with religion. At the same time, religious differences will always exist. Even if you united everyone under the same religion, there would still be disagreements about what's right and wrong. Different people have different psychologies, and different psychologies draw people towards different conceptions of morality. Also, no matter what we do, life seems to have a way of creating unique situations which bring up complex and unclear moral questions. Future generations will have to deal with this, regardless of their religion, because that's quite literally just life. So then what's the solution? If there will always be different religions and different moral systems which exist in human society, and if you need common morals for your society to function, then how do you create a functional society, one which doesn't tear itself apart? It seems impossible. Well, this is a problem humans have been trying to solve for a very long time, and so far we have yet to create the optimal society. But there are a few things we can say for sure. As I said before, religion will always exist. So if you want to have a functional society at all, you must allow different religions to exist in the world. Different moral systems will also always exist. So whether or not you like it, or whether or not you agree, different moral systems must also be allowed to exist. But that doesn't mean you have to allow every moral system and religion. For example, there are certain religions and moral systems which make it okay to lie, or steal, or manipulate, or rape, or murder, as long as you're hurting people outside the group. These are what I call aggressive religions and moral systems. Basically, aggressive religions allow their members to commit harm unto others without provocation just for being part of a different group. I believe that aggressive religions and moral systems should not be allowed in human society because these kinds of moralities will always incite war and damage lives and destabilize society as a whole. If a community of people wants to harm their own members, and if they all agree to it, that's one thing. But when people venture outside their own community and start imposing their version of morality onto others who are not part of their community, then you have a problem. There are too many cases throughout history where aggressive moral systems have been the justification for mass tragedy and war. In my view, the only religions and moral systems which humans should make room for are those which are non-aggressive. Also, if you believe you can control what happens inside other people's communities, that is an example of aggression. If you decide that a certain religious community should teach kids about sex, but you're not part of that community, so you go into that community and start distributing sexual materials to kids, you are the aggressor in that situation. You are trying to impose your version of morality onto another community without provocation. If that community decided to defend themselves by kicking you out, I think that's perfectly fine. And if you decided to attack them with physical violence, they should be allowed to defend themselves with physical violence. Non-aggressive does not necessarily mean non-violent. The key is when violence is applied, and whether that violence is being used defensively or aggressively. But of course, circumstances will not always be that simple. There will always be situations which require more nuance and careful analysis. Sometimes it's a single person who is responsible for acts of aggression, but sometimes it's an entire group or an entire moral system which holds aggressive beliefs and values, in which case, that whole morality and everyone who believes in it should be banished, at least if you want your society to remain stable. Secondly, aside from banishing aggressive belief systems, I think we also need a way of grouping people together who have similar beliefs. We know that a large percent of societal issues happen when people have moral disagreements. So maybe people who have drastically different moral systems should not have to live in the same society. And if they do, they shouldn't necessarily have to be near each other. If we could develop a more formal and systematic way of assembling people according to their beliefs and values, and allow each group to govern themselves, maybe a lot of contentious issues we see in the current day would effectively be solved. Of course, in order to do this, the government would have to step back and actually allow people to govern themselves to a greater extent, which I don't see happening anytime soon. Our current government in America is deeply corrupt and wants to expand its power and control. A government like that would never actually allow people to govern themselves very much because they want to be the ones governing you and telling you what to do. But that's besides the point. Let's pretend for a second that we had a better government. What would be a fair way of grouping people together who have similar beliefs and morals? Here's one idea I've had. Maybe people should be allowed to vote for who they live around, and maybe that voting should apply at the city level and at a more localized level. For example, if you were a black person who wants to live in a majority black city, you should be able to vote for that and kick anyone out who isn't black. If you're a gay person and you want your block of the city to only have gay people, you should be allowed to vote for that and kick anyone out who isn't gay. If you're a Christian and you want your local town to only have Christians, you should be able to vote for that and kick anyone out who isn't a Christian. If you're a woman and you want to live in a region exclusive to women, you should be allowed to vote for that and kick anyone out who isn't a woman. You could call this the common neighbor law or the common neighbor system. Yes, it's true that a lot of people would get kicked out of their current communities if you implemented this law right now. But in the end, it could actually be a good thing, because it would force everyone to find communities where they don't get voted out, which would force you to find and congregate with like-minded individuals who think the way you do. And ultimately, I think a lot of people would be happier with that situation. Of course, housing would need to be much more accessible to implement this law. If a bunch of people get kicked out of their homes, but they can't afford any of the new communities where they'd fit, then you're going to have a whole wave of homeless people who will be extremely unhappy. But again, that's a separate issue, which ironically also has to do with government corruption. Another thing is this common neighbor law could probably be exploited by bad people in some cases. For instance, the current Electoral College works by sectioning certain regions of America. If the common neighbor law went into effect right now, it would completely throw off our electoral system and force America to rearrange its electoral boundaries. A smart person could probably take advantage of that restructuring to gain political power. Another way in which the common neighbor law could be exploited is by allowing people to vote in a way that puts some group in a position to take advantage of another group. For example, if you allowed there to be a community where only kids live, right next to a community of pedophiles and criminals, well, that's probably not going to be a good situation. This is why I think kids should not be allowed to vote for who they live around. Also, criminals, pedophiles, and people who've proven that they're willing to exploit others should not be allowed to participate in the common neighbor system. Or, instead of having a common neighbor system, you could simply allow people to form their own groups and communities of their own free will. The thing is, people can already do that in the US, and yet people still aren't happy. Why? Well, it's mainly because everyone in America is still living under the same government. Although most people don't think of it this way, the government is the main organization responsible for enforcing morals in your country or region. It's the only organization that can legally punish you for committing wrong. And unfortunately, the government uses only one moral system, also known as the legal system. Of course, that moral system changes all the time, but no matter what that moral system is, a large percent of people end up disliking it, because the people of America are very divided in what they believe. We might be called the United States, but the truth is, people in the United States are not so united in how they view right and wrong. So what most people try to do is influence and shape the government according to their own personal moral system. And in order to do that, they have to compete for dominance over people with different moral systems, which causes a lot of infighting. And the more divided people are, the more extreme the infighting becomes, even when these groups aren't near each other geographically. A wise person can see that such a system isn't sustainable. This is why, in my opinion, aside from having a common neighbor law, we also need a dramatic overhaul of how the government is structured, how voting works, and which parts of the country and economy the government has control over. If you look at the ways in which the Founding Fathers structured our voting system, they were operating under the assumption that people from the same state generally share the same views. But of course back then, the population was way smaller, and states like New York had far fewer people. Back then, it might have been realistic for everyone in Maryland to have similar views on morality and government, but that's obviously not the case anymore. Nearly every state in the US is now highly diverse in terms of the people that live there and the kinds of views they have and the kind of moral systems they use. The population is also much larger. No longer can you say that Maryland, or any state for that matter, is united in common thinking or common purpose. In my opinion, the state system should be abandoned altogether in favor of a more city-based system, where cities each get to pass their own laws and have their own mostly sovereign government. And as long as regular everyday people are allowed to form their own cities, when you pass the common neighbor law, it means each community and group in America will have a chance to form their own cities and towns filled with like-minded individuals, which I think would go a long way to creating a stronger country as a whole. It also means that, to some extent, people in America would no longer be forced to live under the rules of people with completely different moral systems. But we've gone off on a tangent. The point is, the common morality problem is something all religions have to deal with. Even if we pass the common neighbor law and change the state system to a city system, the fact that different religions exist, who have different moral systems, means we are always going to see some type of competition between religions. However, if the non-aggressive religions of the world all got together to push out the aggressive religions, you might have a more peaceful world. Will that happen? Probably not in my lifetime. Too many people believe in aggressive religions and value systems, and on top of that, a lot of these people are convinced that their own aggressive religions are, in fact, non-aggressive. None of these people can give an honest assessment of their own beliefs. And in many cases, you have multiple groups fighting each other, and all of them are aggressive. So no matter who wins, the victor will be an aggressive group. Either way, the problem of common morality, along with the final problem of religion, are the two main problems no religion can get past. No matter what positives there are to religion, the main issue with religion will always boil down to the fact that different religions exist and negate each other's claims, as well as the fact that different religions impose different moral systems. And there's no good objective method we can use to prove which one is right. At least not yet. That being said, I won't disparage religion too much. I recognize that religion does have many benefits, and that many people rely on it. And in fact, shared religion can often lead to a better and more cohesive society. So as much as atheists might like me to disavow religion altogether, I'm not going to do that. You're never going to get rid of religion from humanity. Therefore, we must figure out how to create a world where good religions can flourish, and separate good religions from bad religions. Or maybe we'll all die before such a world exists. Anyway, that's what I have to say on this subject. This episode took forever to do because I had so many past notes I had to go through and read to collect all my thoughts. Some of those notes were from 13 years ago. As usual, I don't know when the next episode will come out or what it will be about. I have a couple ideas in mind, but nothing solid. Leave a like if you enjoyed this topic and let me know what you think in the comments. I'm sure plenty of people will have opinions on what I've said. Lastly, feel free to subscribe and share this episode if you feel so inclined. I will never have advertisers for this podcast unless it's something I personally invented or helped to found, so I'm relying on the algorithm and word of mouth to spread this podcast. That's it. I'll talk to you later.